quite a task that we tried to do here on this cemetery. Last year, around August of last year, we became aware of a situation in this cemetery. And the man who made us aware of that is here with us today. His name is Mark Atkins. Mark, would you raise your hand, please? He owns land, I think, right here. Is this right there? His family owns land.
More behind you.
And he remembers when he was a little boy playing in this cemetery. And he remembers this plot of 5 graves right here. And so he contacted a gentleman in Poto. It's odd that that's my hometown in eastern Oklahoma, LaPorte County. And he contacted me. And we went through a real process of trying to identify what we needed to do here. And the first, our camp decided we want to make this a project. And the first one of our camp members who came down here to visit is Rod Beckenauer. Rod, raise your hand up. He was the first one to come down here. And then we had 7 of us come here to start looking at this cemetery. Those 7 men were Jerry Patrick, Commander, raise your hand please. Jimmy Carter, not the president, but a member of the SCV. We're going to leave that there. The other Jimmy Carter. Richard McDonald, our chaplain. Dallas Carter, Jimmy's son, who's not here today. Carter Holland, Jimmy's nephew, who's not here today. Rod, and myself. Larry Logan is my name. We contacted a man whose name is on the cemetery page. His name is Gene Phillips. He happens to be a Sons of Confederate Veterans member in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. He referred me to a lady in Alec named Shirley Bray. She referred me to the caretaker named Caressa Ray, and we got around and we started mowing this, and they only had enough money to mow it 1 time a year. Well, when we got out here to mow it last September, we came down about 3 times, and it was as high as an elephant's eye. It really, really was. We did get it taken around, and last year we finished it up, and we're very thankful to everybody who's helped us, and we're particularly thankful to a man named Red Neighbors, who's not here today, but he lives south of Blanchard on Highway 76. He was here and had his riding mower and mowed most of it by himself, but we're very thankful to him. He's got a small melanoma problem, so he won't be able to help us anymore. So if you know anybody who's interested in mowing this for good and get paid something, we'd be more than happy to have you here. Now, how we identified the veterans. This is everybody's always talking about these 5 over here, but there's 16 veterans that we've identified in this cemetery. When we first got the list of the cemetery, there were 5 that were listed on the cemetery roster. There was also one who has a stone here, but he's buried in a mass grave in Louisiana. And there's one more that was listed. His name was John T. Bazar, who was listed as being in an unmarked grave. So we knew of 7. So then we did a physical inventory of the cemetery. And we got all the birth dates, which they may have been Confederate soldiers or Union soldiers. And we checked them all out. And we found 5 more that they served. So that got us up to 12. Well, then a godsend came. Virgil Shane, who is over with the color guard over here, he's the commander of the Duncan camp. He got in touch with the Grady County Historical Society, and they provided us a list of the soldiers that they said were in the cemetery. And they gave us a list of 15 names. Now, we had 12 already. So with this 15, we compared the names. And there were 4 names on that list that were not on the cemetery list and were not have tombstones here. There was one name that was not on that list. And that man's name was John T. Bazar, who is listed on the cemetery in an unknown grave. So we put 2 and 2 together. We know of 11. We know the 5 on the cemetery list, we know the 5 we identified, and we know the 1 who's buried in a mass grave in Louisiana. And then we know of John T. Bazar and the 4 others that were on the list from Grady County. Put the 4 and the 1 together, and you have the 5 Confederate soldiers right there. Now, are we sure of that? We're not 100% sure. But it's the only way it works out. So we don't know which soldier is in each one of those graves. And there's a lot of conjecture about how they got here. You know, it's a different burial plot than most plots here in Oklahoma. That concrete at the top, you don't see that a lot. You see it some, but not a lot. But They may have known each other from the war. They may have been in the Confederate home in Arden where John Bazar was. He possibly could have known the others. And they may not have come here at the same time. They may have been at different times they were buried. But that's how we came to the 16 soldiers. And the condition of this cemetery, and back in the 90s, I believe, you're Mr. Butler, aren't you?
Correct.
Okay. They did have some occasions here where they did honor these, but it's about been 20 years since they've been recognized in any way. So we very much appreciate you being here to honor these soldiers. I wanted to also there is a descendant of John T. Bazar. I don't know if he's here today. Is Mr. Crump here today? His name is John Crump. He lives in Chickasha. He was quoted in the article in the Oklahoman yesterday. He's the great-grandson of John T. Bazar. And he did not know where he was buried. And so we found him. He's in Naples Cemetery. And then through the process of elimination, we found the approximate location of the plot that he's in. So we do have some descendants in the area. I also want to thank the Ouachita Valley Weekly for covering this, the Blanchard News for covering this, the Oklahoman for covering this, and for some reason the Chickasha Express News chose not to cover it. We're extremely proud of what we've done here, and we have plans in the future that we hope we can do this again. I've counted just ballpark, and we've got over 40 people here today. That's amazing. We had one of these for the first time in Oklahoma City last year. We had 27 people. So you're to be congratulated. Absolutely. The camps that are sponsoring this are our camp, Camp 513 in Moore. It's named Lieutenant Colonel Jackson F. McCurtain Camp. Our camp commander is Jerry Patrick, right here. And it's named after Jackson McCurtain, who was a great Choctaw Confederate. He was a warrior. He had his own unit that he led, the 1st Chickasaw and Choctaw Mounted Rifles. McCurtain County is named after him. He was later chief of the Choctaw tribe from 1878 to 1884. Camp 1356 of Duncan is General Joe Shelby's Oklahoma Iron Men. These are the men in the color guard over here. They're an excellent camp. We're the 3rd largest camp. I think they're the 5th largest camp in Oklahoma. So we have a great camp here in our state. If you don't think the Civil War happened in Indian Territory, you ought to ask the 34% of Indian women who were widows after the war. You ought to ask the 14% of Indian children who were orphans, and another 16% who didn't have any fathers. The war happened out here. There were 7 major battles, over 100 skirmishes. And Indian Territory, for the percentage of people who lived here, the casualties that occurred here was second only to one state, and that was North Carolina. There was great turmoil here in Indian Territory. I want to read off a few of the names of the valiant Confederate soldiers who served here in Indian Territory. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson F. McCurtain, Choctaw warrior. Colonel Tandy A. Walker, Choctaw warrior. Colonel John Jumper, Seminole warrior. Colonel Daniel N. McIntosh, Creek warrior. Colonel Martin Chico, Chickasaw warrior. Brigadier General Stan Wadey, Cherokee warrior. Colonel William Penn Adair, Cherokee warrior. Captain Clem Van Rogers, Cherokee warrior. So many counties in Oklahoma: McCurtain County, Adair County. Rogers County is named after Clem Van Rogers, where Claremore is. By the way, Clem Van Rogers had a son a little bit later in life. His name was Will Rogers. Will Rogers was a descendant of a Confederate soldier. We have a great deal of heritage in our own state to be proud of. At this time, I would like to read the names of the soldiers, the 16 soldiers who are buried here in Naples Cemetery. The first 10 names will be the names of those we have stones for and have identified them. Jimmy Carter. Oh, I'm sorry. Larry. Larry, you're going to name the 10. I'm sorry. Larry's going to name the 10. You're going to read the 6.
10 of the names buried here in this Naples Cemetery. David Bishop Chambers. Sham J.H. Clark, 24th Mississippi Company D. Neil Dorsey, Gordon's Regiment, Arkansas Cavalry. Thomas C. Gore, 11th Tennessee Infantry. Joseph William Hill, 9th Tennessee Infantry, Company A. P.H. Martin, 12th Texas Cavalry, Company A. C.A. Ramsey, 1st North Carolina Artillery. F.M. Russell, 1st Texas Infantry. John Lawson True, 48th Mississippi Infantry, Company D. And Robert Fisher, who we don't know what unit he served in.
In the site here where the 5 flags are, buried in the burial plot of 5, the first one, which Larry had mentioned, John T. Bazar, 12th Louisiana Infantry, Company D. John Barker, Texas Infantry. James S. Goins, we don't know exactly what he was affiliated with, but he is one of the 5. Major McKeel, 18th North Carolina Infantry, Company, looks like H maybe? H. Robert Wolf, 27th South Carolina Infantry, also buried in a mass grave in Louisiana, which was mentioned, where he was killed in action in the fall of 1864, but has a stone in this cemetery, Naples Cemetery, identifying him as a Confederate soldier, is George W. Peel, Alexander's 34th Regiment, Texas Cavalry, 2nd Texas Partisan Rangers, Company A.
Notes left. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your attention during the rifle salute. I just want to tell you a few things about next year. We would very much like to do this again next year. And, you know, we think big. So next year, we got 40 people here this year. I think we can have a bigger crowd next year. And what we would be more than willing willing to do, and just make it not just a Confederate deal, but we would host it, but an entire cemetery opportunity to have some fellowship with one another. We can have a few tables up here and watermelon or something like that. Just remember to bring your chairs next year, okay? So everybody can have a seat to eat your watermelon or something that we can do in. I also want to say that this color guard over here is an excellent group. They go several different places. They're supposed to be in Shreveport next week for a National Sons of Confederate Veterans event. I think they're going to be in Ardmore on Monday, and so they're very helpful. I would urge you, if you have people buried here in this cemetery, to contact the caretaker and make a contribution to Naples to help them care for this, because they need to keep this mowed on a regular basis. We'll do our part, but it needs to be mowed on a regular basis to keep it from getting so tall. Lastly, I also want to make a major announcement here of what our camp is going to be doing next month in Oklahoma City. On June 20th in Oklahoma City, our camp and the Oklahoma City camp, and our color guard will be here as well, we're having an event in Fairlawn Cemetery in Oklahoma City. It's an historic cemetery in Oklahoma City. Some of the earliest pioneers of Oklahoma are buried in that cemetery. There's a Confederate monument there, and there are 26 Confederate soldiers buried in that cemetery. We're going to celebrate the end of the invasion, and we're going to celebrate Brigadier General Stan Wade, who was the last Confederate general to agree to a ceasefire. He did it in Dokesville, Indian Territory, which is down by Fort Townsend, Oklahoma, on June 23rd, 1865. This will be on June 20th. And as our special guest speaker, we're having a wonderful spokesman for the Confederate cause. His name is Mr. H.K. Edgerton. He's a black man from Asheville, North Carolina. He speaks about the Confederacy for many places and many times. He used to be head and president of the NAACP in Asheville, and he now is a great spokesman for Confederate cause. And we would invite all of you to come to that cemetery 6:30 on June 20th, Saturday night, at Fairlawn Cemetery, 26 in Chartell in Oklahoma City. Hope you'll make it there. Now, are you Mr. Crump, by the way? Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you might be. He was going to come, but he's not here. All right, we are going to do one thing here. We'll ask all of you to join in it, and then we'll retire the colors, and then we'll have the benediction. I'm not much of a singer, but whenever you have a Confederate gathering, you got to sing Dixie. So I'm not much of a singer, but I'm asking you to join with me. Ready? 1, 2,